The champagne flute shattered against marble with a sound like a gunshot, and Chen found herself on her knees, picking up crystal shards with bare hands while 300 people pretended not to watch. She had 60 seconds, maybe less, before her blood ruined the Valentino gown pulling 2 inches from her fingers. For hours earlier, Apex occupied the entire 52nd floor of Chicago's Luminescence Tower, with a reservation list stretched 22 months into the future, and the tasting menu cost $1,400 per person before wine pairings. The dining room was a study in calculated opulence. Brazilian rosewood floors, hand-blown Venetian chandeliers casting amber light across tables draped in Irish linen, floor-to-ceiling windows framing Lake Michigan like a living painting. The silverware was French, the china Italian, and the silence, that particular hushed reverence of extreme wealth, was priceless. Chen moved through this landscape of excess like a shadow, her 27-year-old frame wrapped in the restaurant's exacting uniform. A white silk shirt with mother-of-pearl buttons beneath a tailored black vest, black trousers with a razor crease, and Italian leather shoes that had taken 3 months to break in. Her hair, black and thick, was scraped into a bun so tight it pulled at her temples, accentuating the premature lines around eyes that had witnessed the dismantling of an entire life in the span of 18 months. She had been standing for 9 hours. Her shift had started at 11 that morning and wouldn't end until midnight. Tomorrow would be identical, and the day after. Because her father's Alzheimer's care cost $9,200 monthly, and the memory care facility didn't accept payment plans, and the alternative was watching him deteriorate in a state institution that warehoused human beings like forgotten luggage. 2 years ago, had been finishing her MBA at Northwestern's Kellogg School of Management, specializing in international corporate restructuring. She had graduated summa cum laude from Yale, spent 3 years at McKinsey, and been courted by private equity firms offering 7-figure compensation packages. Then her father, a brilliant civil engineer who had built bridges across 3 continents, had begun forgetting her name. The diagnosis had arrived with bureaucratic efficiency. Early onset Alzheimer's, aggressive progression, no insurance coverage for long-term care. Her mother had died of breast cancer when Maya was 19. There was no one else. Maya had walked away from McKinsey, declined the PE offers, and eventually found herself here, balancing trays of Chateau Margaux at $3,000 per bottle for people who wouldn't remember her face 5 minutes after she left their table. Tonight's crowd represented Chicago's apex predators, real estate developers, tech mobiles, derivatives traders, and at table 12, the restaurant's prime position, centered before the windows, sat Julian Blackwell, founder and CEO of Titanium Capital Partners, a private equity empire managing $47 billion in assets. Blackwell's personal net worth hovered around $3.8 billion according to the most recent Bloomberg estimates. He was 54, wearing a custom Stefano Ricci suit in charcoal gray that had been assembled in Florence by craftsmen who knew his measurements by heart, complemented by a Patek Philippe watch worth more than most Americans' houses. Blackwell possessed the particular cruelty of men who confused wealth accumulation with evolutionary superiority. His face, tanned from a recent safari in Tanzania, held an expression of perpetual disdain, as though the world were a disappointing restaurant meal he'd been forced to endure. He was entertaining potential investors, 4 men in similar suits, speaking in the coded language of leveraged buyouts and hostile takeovers, and making a show of his dominance in the way alpha primates displayed aggression. Maya was refilling water glasses at table 12 when Blackwell suddenly thrust his champagne flute toward her without looking pissed. Attention focused on his companions. The crystal connected with her wrist with enough force to knock it from his hand. The glass tumbled through air in slow motion, champagne arcing outward in a golden spray, before exploding against the rosewood floor. The dining room went silent. Blackwell turned to look at Maya for the first time, his eyes moving over her with the flat assessment of someone evaluating livestock. "You just cost me $400. That was Krug Class Diambone, in case your education didn't cover expensive champagne." Maya's face remained neutral, though her hands had begun to tremble. "I apologize, sir. I'll have the sommelier, you'll what?" Blackwell's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "Replace it with my money." He leaned back in his chair, enjoying himself now, aware that every table was watching. Here's what you're going to do. You're going to get on your knees, clean up this mess you made, and maybe, I won't speak to your manager about having you fired. Because I assume you need this job. People like you always need the job. The words landed with calculated precision. Maya's face went white, then red. Around them, the restaurant held its collective breath. Sir, she said quietly, I'm happy to clean the spill, but I didn't. On your knees. Blackwell's voice dropped to something colder. Now, or I'll make sure you never work in this city again. I know the owners of 40 restaurants in Chicago. Do you understand me? Maya understood perfectly. She understood power and leverage and the exact distance between her pride and her father's next month of care. She knelt. The rosewood floor was cold against Maya's knees, even through her uniform trousers. Crystal shards glittered in the champagne puddle like scattered diamonds, each piece sharp enough to slice skin. She began picking them up carefully, aware of 300 eyes on her back, aware of Blackwell's satisfied expression, aware that her hands were shaking badly enough that one of the larger shards slipped and opened a thin line across her thumb. Blood welled up, bright red against her pale skin. A drop fell into the champagne puddle, blooming outward. Faster, Blackwell said conversationally, turning back to his investors. We don't have all night. Some of us have actual important work to discuss. His companions laughed, nervous, complicit laughter that filled the silence. Maya's mind had split into two tracks. One track registered the physical humiliation, the ache in her knees, the sting of the cut, the weight of collective attention. The other track, the part trained at Yale and McKinsey, the part that had negotiated billion-dollar restructurings, was calculating with cold precision. She recognized Blackwell's play. This wasn't about the champagne. This was about dominance display, about reasserting hierarchy in front of his investors, about grinding someone beneath him to remind everyone at the table of his power. She had seen this exact dynamic before, had studied it in business school, had executed similar power plays herself in conference rooms, though never with this particular cruelty. A server appeared with a dustpan and towel, kneeling beside her. Maya, he whispered, let me. It's fine, Carlos. Her voice was steady. She continued picking up crystal, depositing it into the dustpan, her bleeding thumb leaving small red prints on the white linen towel. Blackwell was in full performance now, entertaining his table with a story about acquiring and dismantling a manufacturing company in Ohio, his voice loud enough to carry. We stripped the assets, sold the real estate, and liquidated the pension fund. Sometimes you have to break things to create value. That's what separates people like us from people like. He gestured vaguely toward Maya without looking at her. Them. We understand that sentiment is expensive. One of his investors shifted uncomfortably. Julian, that's a bit what? Honest. Blackwell smiled. Come on, Richard. We're all adults here. This is a Darwinian world. The strong extract value from the weak. Always have, always will. It's economics, not cruelty. Maya's hands had stopped trembling. Something cold and analytical had taken over, the same state of clarity she used to enter before major negotiations. She finished collecting the crystal, wiped the champagne with the towel, and stood slowly. Her knees protested. Her thumb was bleeding steadily now, but she ignored it. She looked directly at Julian Blackwell for the first time. Sir, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the silent dining room. Your analysis is incomplete. The table went still. Blackwell's head turned slowly, his expression shifting from satisfaction to disbelief. Excuse me. Maya felt something unlock inside her chest. 3 years of invisible servitude, of swallowing humiliation, of pretending she was less than she was. It crystallized into perfect, focused clarity. Your Ohio manufacturing acquisition. You're talking about Precision Components Incorporated. You acquired them 16 months ago for $340 million, liquidated their pension fund, sold their facilities to a Chinese competitor, and laid off 1,400 workers. Her voice was clinical, detached, the tone she'd used delivering presentations to hostile clients. You claimed a $90 million profit in the deal, but your analysis was incomplete. You failed to account for 3 factors. Blackwell's face had gone rigid. His investors were staring at Maya as though a painting had begun speaking. First, Maya continued, The pension fund liquidation violated ERISA regulations in a way that's currently being investigated by the Department of Labor. Second, your sale of proprietary technology to the Chinese buyer triggered a CFIUS review that's likely to result in significant fines for illegal technology transfer. Third, the Ohio state government is pursuing you for $23 million in tax breaks that were contingent on maintaining employment levels you didn't maintain. She paused, her bleeding thumb leaving a small red mark on her white shirt. So your actual profit, after legal fees and penalties, will be approximately $14 million, not $90 million. That's a 4.1% return over 16 months. You would have done better putting the money in Treasury bonds. That's not Darwinism, Mr. Blackwell. That's incompetence dressed up as philosophy. The silence in the restaurant was absolute. Blackwell's face had progressed from rigid to purple, his jaw working soundlessly. One of his investors let out a low whistle. Another had pulled out his phone, clearly already fact-checking her claims. How dare you? Blackwell's voice was strangled. Who the hell do you think you are? The dining room doors opened. James Morrison, Apex's general manager, entered with his characteristic unhurried grace. He was 63, silver-haired, and had spent 40 years in Chicago's restaurant scene building a reputation for unflappable professionalism. But his expression now carried something Maya had never seen before, barely suppressed rage. Mr. Blackwell, Morrison said, his cultured voice cutting through the tension like a surgical instrument. I'm going to have to ask you to leave. Julian Blackwell stared at Morrison as though the manager had announced the restaurant was serving rat poison for dessert. You're asking me to leave? Your waitress just humiliated me in front of your waitress, Morrison interrupted, his voice still perfectly controlled but carrying an edge that silenced Blackwell mid-sentence, is Maya Chen. Until 18 months ago, she was a senior associate at McKinsey & Company, where she specialized in corporate restructuring and led the team that saved North Star Industries from bankruptcy, preserving 8,000 jobs and generating $340 million in stakeholder value. Before that, she graduated summa cum laude from Yale and was being recruited by every major PE firm in New York. The words dropped into the silence like stones into still water, their ripples spreading outward. Diners at nearby tables had abandoned any pretense of eating. Blackwell's investors were looking at him with expressions ranging from shock to poorly concealed schadenfreude. Morrison moved closer to table 12, his posture radiating controlled fury. She left McKinsey to care for her father, who has early-onset Alzheimer's. She works here because she needs health insurance and a flexible schedule that allows her to visit him daily. She works double shifts without complaint. She is the most educated, overqualified person in this dining room, and you, his voice hardened. You made her kneel to pick up a glass you knocked out of your own hand because you couldn't be bothered to look at her while you were gesturing. Blackwell's face had gone from purple to white. I didn't. She was, the glass. I watched it happen on security footage, Morrison said flatly. Before I came out here, you thrust the glass toward her while you were talking, struck her wrist, and it fell from your hand. Then you blamed her because you could. Because you wanted to remind your investors that you're powerful enough to humiliate someone without consequence. One of Blackwell's investors stood abruptly, dropping his napkin on the table. Julian, I think I'm going to catch a cab. Richard, wait. Blackwell half rose from his chair. No. Richard's voice was cold. I've been on the fence about the Titan Fund investment. I'm off the fence now. I'm out. He looked at Maya. Miss Chen, I don't know if you're looking for consulting work, but my firm needs someone with your background. Here's my card. He pulled a business card from his wallet, placed it on the table beside her, and walked toward the exit. A second investor followed immediately. Julian, have your office call Maya. We'll need to restructure our arrangement. Blackwell was standing now, his perfect suit rumpled, his face a mask of desperate calculation. This is ridiculous. Over one waitress? Over one incident. It's not about one incident, the third investor said quietly, gathering his things. It's about judgment. You told us that Ohio story like it was a triumph. She just explained why it was a disaster. And instead of learning something, you're trying to salvage your ego. He nodded to Maya. Miss Chen. Within 90 seconds, Blackwell's table had emptied except for him. He stood alone among the wreckage of his power display, surrounded by half-empty glasses and the scattered debris of his credibility. Morrison's expression hadn't softened. "Mr. Blackwell, you have 60 seconds to leave before I call security. You're making a mistake." Blackwell's voice had lost its authority, becoming something smaller and meaner. "I know the owners. I'll have you." "The owners are my brothers," Morrison said. "We inherited this restaurant from our father 30 years ago. You can call them if you'd like. They're both at home, and they both already know what happened here tonight, because I texted them before I came out. They told me, and I quote, 'Get that piece of trash out of our restaurant.'" Blackwell's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. He grabbed his jacket from the chair back with shaking hands and walked toward the exit with as much dignity as he could salvage, which was very little. The dining room watched in absolute silence until the elevator doors closed behind him. Then someone started clapping. Within seconds, the entire restaurant erupted in applause. Maya stood frozen, blood still dripping from her thumb, her face cycling through expressions she couldn't control: shock, relief, exhaustion, something dangerously close to tears. Morrison pulled a clean linen napkin from his pocket and wrapped it around her thumb with surprising gentleness. "Maya, your shift is over. Go home. Take tomorrow off. Take the rest of the week if you need it. I can't afford to. Paid." Morrison's voice was firm. "I'm not asking." Carlos appeared with her coat and bag. Other servers squeezed her shoulder as she passed, their faces showing something like awe. She made it to the elevator before the shaking started in earnest, before the adrenaline crash hit like a physical blow. She pulled out Richard's business card in the descending elevator. "Richard Chen, managing partner, Fortress Capital." The note on the back read, "Call me Monday. $250,000 base, full benefits. We need someone who tells truth to power." Maya's phone buzzed. A text from her father's memory care facility. "Your dad had a good day today. Asked about you twice and remembered your name both times." She pressed her forehead against the elevator's cool mirror and allowed herself to cry. Not from humiliation or relief, but from the sudden, overwhelming recognition that she was still herself. That 2 years of invisible servitude hadn't erased what she had been, what she could still be. That competence and dignity weren't functions of job title, but of character. Maya Chen walked out of Apex at 10:17 p.m., 3 hours before her shift was supposed to end. She walked out with a business card promising the career she'd abandoned, with a napkin wrapped around her thumb like a medal, and with the absolute certainty that she had knelt for the last time for anyone who couldn't see her worth. Behind her, through the windows 52 floors above Chicago, the lights of the city spread outward like scattered stars, infinite, indifferent, and finally within reach again.